The locket burned against Quinn Dalton's chest like a brand that never cooled, even after 7 years of carrying it through dust storms, gunfights, and the slow rebuilding of a life he never imagined living without her. He stood behind the counter of his general store in Nebraska City, Nebraska, watching the afternoon sun paint gold across the wooden floorboards, his hand unconsciously moving to touch the metal through his shirt, as it did 100 times each day. The bell above the door chimed, and he looked up from his ledger with the practiced smile of a shopkeeper. But the smile froze on his face because Faith Whitmore was walking through that door, alive and real and impossible, when he had buried her memory in his heart 7 years ago after they told him she was dead. The ledger slipped from his fingers and hit the counter with a dull thud. Faith stopped 3 steps into the store, her green eyes widening as recognition dawned across her face, and for a moment neither of them could breathe. She wore a dusty traveling dress the color of faded violets, her dark hair pulled back in a simple bun, and she looked older than the girl in the photograph he carried, but it was her. It was undeniably her. Quinn. Her voice came out barely above a whisper, and the sound of his name from her lips after all these years nearly brought him to his knees. He came around the counter without thinking, his boots heavy on the floor, stopping an arm's length away because he was afraid if he touched her she might vanish like morning mist. "They told me you were dead. The stagecoach attack in 1867. They said there were no survivors." Faith's hand went to her throat, her fingers trembling. "I thought the same about you. When I finally made it back to Missouri, your family said you had died trying to find me. They had a grave and everything." The store felt too small suddenly, the air too thick. Quinn's mind spun through 7 years in seconds, trying to reconcile the ghost he had mourned with the woman standing before him. "How?" he managed. "How are you here? Can we sit down?" Faith asked, and he noticed how pale she had gone. "This is a lot to take in all at once." Quinn nodded and led her to the back of the store, where he kept a small office with 2 chairs and a desk buried under order forms and invoices. He cleared off one of the chairs for her, his hands moving automatically while his brain struggled to catch up with reality. Faith sank into the seat gratefully, and he took the chair across from her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "Start from the beginning," he said softly. "Tell me everything." Faith took a shaky breath, her eyes fixed on some point beyond his shoulder as if she was looking back through time. "The stagecoach was attacked by raiders about 30 miles outside of Kansas City. You remember I was traveling to visit my aunt." Quinn nodded. He remembered every detail of that day. They had been courting for 8 months, and he was planning to ask her to marry him when she returned. He was 21 years old and certain he had found the woman he would spend his life with. "There were 6 passengers," Faith continued, her voice steady but strained. "The raiders came out of nowhere, shooting the driver and the guard before we knew what was happening. They stopped the coach and demanded our valuables. One of the passengers, an older man, tried to fight back." She closed her eyes briefly. "They shot him. Then they set fire to the coach and rode off, leaving us for dead." Quinn's hands clenched into fists. He had heard versions of this story before, pieced together from newspaper reports and witness accounts, but hearing it from Faith made it visceral and real in a way that turned his stomach. "I managed to get out before the fire spread too far," Faith said, "but I was hurt. I had hit my head when the coach overturned, and I could not remember who I was. There was blood and smoke, and I just started walking. I walked until I collapsed, and a family traveling west found me on the side of the road. They took me in, nursed me back to health, but I could not tell them my name or where I came from. Everything before waking up in their wagon was just gone." "Amnesia," Quinn breathed. "For how long?" "4 years. The words hung between them like stones. 4 years of not knowing who I was. The family who found me, the Hendersons, they were good people. They took me with them to Oregon, and I worked as a seamstress in Portland. They called me Jane because I could not tell them different. And then one day I was working on a dress and I pricked my finger with a needle, and when I looked at the blood, everything came rushing back. My name, my family, you. Her voice broke on the last word. I remembered you. Quinn's throat tightened. What did you do? I left as soon as I could arrange passage. It took me 3 months to get back to Missouri, working my way across the country wherever I could find employment. When I finally made it home, my parents had passed. Cholera epidemic 2 years prior. My neighbors told me what happened to you, how you had gone looking for me, how you never came back. They showed me the grave your family had put up. My family moved to California in '69, Quinn said, the pieces starting to fit together in a horrible, sensible way. My father got work with the railroad. I had stayed behind because I could not let go, could not stop looking for you even though everyone said it was hopeless. We had a falling out about it. They thought I was wasting my life mourning a ghost. When they left, I told them I was dead to them, and I guess they took me at my word. Faith's eyes glistened with unshed tears. 7 years, Quinn. We lost 7 years because of lies and misunderstandings and terrible luck. He reached into his shirt and pulled out the locket, letting it hang from its chain between them. Faith's breath caught as she recognized it. You kept it, she whispered. I never took it off, not once in 7 years. He opened it, showing her the small photograph inside, a daguerreotype taken at a fair the summer before the attack. She looked so young in it, barely 19, smiling at something beyond the camera's frame. He had looked at this image so many times that he could see it with his eyes closed. Faith reached out slowly, her fingers brushing the locket, and then her hand found his. The touch sent electricity through him, 7 years of grief and longing condensing into a single point of contact. I looked for you, she said. When I got my memory back, I looked everywhere. But the trail was cold and I had no money, no resources. I ended up working my way west again, thinking maybe I could start over, and I heard Nebraska City was a growing town with opportunities. I never imagined, never dreamed that you would be here. Quinn turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. Her skin was warm and real and alive. I came here 5 years ago. After my family left, I stayed in Missouri for another year, but everywhere I looked I saw you. Every street corner, every shop, every church pew. I was going mad with it. A friend suggested I head west, make a fresh start. I worked cattle drives for 2 years, saved every penny, and bought this store 3 years ago. I thought if I built something new, something solid, maybe I could finally let you go. Could you? Faith asked. Let me go, he shook his head. Not for a single day. Every woman who walked into this store, for just a second my heart would jump thinking it might be you. I knew it was impossible, knew you were gone, but I could not help it. They sat in silence for a moment, hands clasped, both of them trying to navigate the impossible reality that they were together again. Outside the office, Quinn could hear the sounds of the street, horses passing, someone calling out a greeting, the normal sounds of an afternoon in Nebraska City. Inside this small room, the world had tilted on its axis. What do we do now? Faith asked finally. Quinn squeezed her hand gently. I would like to start by offering you supper. There is a boarding house 2 streets over that serves a decent meal, and I imagine you are hungry after traveling. We can talk more, figure out where we go from here. Faith smiled, and it was like watching the sun come out from behind clouds. I would like that very much. He reluctantly released her hand and stood, offering his arm. She took it, rising from the chair, and they walked back through the store together. Quinn flipped the sign on the door to closed, not caring that he was losing business hours. Some things were more important than profit. The boarding house was run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson, a round woman with kind eyes who knew everyone's business in town but was discreet enough not to gossip maliciously. She raised her eyebrows when Quinn walked in with Faith on his arm, but simply smiled and showed them to a table by the window. Over plates of roast chicken and potatoes, they continued to fill in the gaps of 7 years. Quinn told her about the cattle drives, about the time he nearly died from a rattlesnake bite in Kansas, about slowly building his store from nothing. Faith told him about Oregon, about learning to make dresses that the wealthy ladies in Portland would pay good money for, about the strange sensation of living a life that did not quite feel like her own. "Did you ever consider marrying?" Quinn asked, then immediately wished he could take the question back. He had no right to ask, no claim on her after all this time, but Faith did not seem offended. "No," she said simply. "Even when I could not remember you, I felt like something was missing. The Hendersons introduced me to several young men, all perfectly nice, but I could not imagine tying my life to any of them. After I got my memory back, I knew why. How could I marry anyone else when my heart belonged to a dead man?" She looked up at him. "What about you?" "Same answer," Quinn said. "There was a school teacher 2 years ago who made it clear she was interested. Everyone in town tried to push us together. She was smart, pretty, everything a man could want. But she was not you." Faith set down her fork and reached across the table, taking his hand again. "We were so young when we met. I was barely 19, you were 21. We have both changed so much. Are you sure the man you are now still wants what the boy you were wanted?" Quinn met her eyes steadily. "I have changed, that is true. I have seen hard things, done hard things. But carrying your picture for 7 years, that never felt like a burden. It felt like keeping a promise. The boy I was loved you with everything he had. The man I am loves you just the same, maybe more because I know now how rare it is to find someone worth holding on to." Tears spilled down Faith's cheeks and she did not bother to wipe them away. "I was so scared," she admitted. "Scared that I had built you up in my memory into something you were not. Scared that you would not be the same person I remembered. But sitting here with you, it feels like coming home." They finished their meal in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes when 2 people understand each other without needing words. When Mrs. Patterson brought apple pie for dessert, she also brought a knowing smile. "I have a room available if the lady needs a place to stay," she offered. Faith glanced at Quinn, a question in her eyes. "I would like to stay in Nebraska City for a while if that is acceptable." "More than acceptable," Quinn said. "I would like that very much." Mrs. Patterson beamed. "Wonderful, I will get the blue room ready. It is small but comfortable, and the window faces east so you get the morning light." After supper, Quinn walked Faith back to the boarding house slowly, taking the long way through town. Nebraska City in the spring of 1874 was a thriving community, grown from a rough river town into something more substantial. The streets were a mix of mud and boardwalks, buildings ranging from simple wooden structures to more ambitious 2-story affairs. Quinn pointed out landmarks as they walked, the church where he occasionally attended services, the saloon he avoided, the livery where he boarded his horse. "You like it here?" Faith asked as they paused at a corner to let a wagon pass. "I do," Quinn said. "It is not home, not the way Missouri was, but it is a good place. The people are decent for the most part, and there is opportunity for those willing to work hard." They reached the boarding house too soon, both of them reluctant to part. Quinn walked Faith to the door but did not go inside. "Can I see you tomorrow?" he asked. "I would be disappointed if you did not," Faith replied. She hesitated, then stepped closer, rising on her toes to kiss his cheek. The brief touch of her lips against his skin sent warmth flooding through him. "Thank you for supper. And for believing that this is real." "It is the most real thing I have felt in 7 years," Quinn said quietly. He waited until she was safely inside before walking back to his store, his mind whirling with possibilities and plans. The locket still hung around his neck, but now it felt different. No longer a memorial to something lost, but a bridge between past and future. Over the next few weeks, Quinn and Faith fell into a pattern. He would open the store at dawn, and she would come by mid-morning, often bringing coffee from the boarding house. She would help him with small tasks, organizing shelves, helping customers, keeping the accounts in her neat handwriting. In return, Quinn paid her a small wage, insisting that she needed to build up her savings. "I am not a charity case," Faith protested one afternoon as she balanced the ledger. "I know you are not," Quinn said, "but you are someone starting over, same as I did 5 years ago. Let me help. You would do the same for me." She could not argue with that, so she accepted the arrangement. The townspeople quickly grew accustomed to seeing them together, and the gossip mill churned happily with speculation about the newcomer, who had so clearly captured the heart of their usually reserved shopkeeper. Quinn found himself telling Faith things he had never told anyone else, about the darkness that had consumed him after he thought she died, about the nights he had considered just riding off into the prairie and not coming back. Faith in turn shared her own struggles, the fear and confusion of living without a past, the gut-wrenching moment when her memories returned, and she realized how much time had been stolen from her. "I was angry," she admitted one evening as they sat on the bench outside the store, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "When I remembered, I was so angry at the universe for being so cruel. We had done nothing wrong, but we lost everything anyway." Quinn took her hand, a gesture that had become natural over the weeks. "We lost 7 years, but we found each other again. That has to count for something." "It counts for everything," Faith said softly. As April turned into May, Quinn realized he could not imagine his life without Faith in it anymore. She had become essential, woven into the fabric of his days as naturally as breathing. He started thinking about the future in concrete terms, about expanding the store, maybe buying some land on the edge of town where he could build a house. A house big enough for a family. He bought a ring from a jeweler traveling through town, a simple gold band with a small sapphire that reminded him of Faith's eyes in certain light. He carried it in his pocket for 3 days, waiting for the right moment, before realizing that with Faith, every moment felt right. On a Sunday afternoon in mid-May, he closed the store early and asked Faith if she would take a walk with him. They headed out of town toward the river, following a path through the cottonwood trees. The Missouri River was high with spring runoff, the water rushing past with a sound like constant conversation. Quinn led her to a spot where the bank widened into a small clearing, grass growing thick and green. "This is where I come when I need to think," he said. "It is peaceful here." Faith turned in a slow circle, taking in the view. "It is beautiful." Quinn took a deep breath, his heart hammering in his chest. 7 years ago, he had planned an elaborate proposal, had practiced a speech, had everything mapped out perfectly. Then Faith had vanished, and those plans had died with her. Now, standing here with her alive and real beside him, he realized he did not need elaborate gestures or practiced words. He just needed to be honest. "Faith," he said, and she turned to face him, something in his tone making her eyes widen. 7 years ago, I was planning to ask you to marry me when you got back from visiting your aunt. I had already talked to your father, had bought a ring, had everything ready. I wanted to wait until the time was perfect. He pulled the new ring from his pocket, holding it between them. I learned the hard way that there is no such thing as perfect timing. There is just now this moment and the choice to take it or let it pass. I love you. I have loved you for 7 years, and I will love you for the rest of my life if you will let me. Will you marry me? Faith's hand went to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. For a horrible moment, Quinn thought she might say no, that perhaps the years had changed her feelings more than she had admitted. But then she was nodding, laughing and crying at the same time and throwing her arms around his neck. Yes, she said against his shoulder. Yes, of course, yes. I have been waiting 7 years to hear you ask that question. Quinn slid the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, and then he was kissing her, really kissing her for the first time since they had reunited. It was tender and desperate and full of 7 years of longing finally finding release. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. I am not letting you out of my sight again, he murmured. I am not going anywhere, Faith promised. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church on Main Street. Faith wore a dress she made herself, cream-colored silk with lace at the collar and cuffs. Quinn wore his best suit, brushed and pressed until it looked almost new. Mrs. Patterson cried through the entire ceremony, and half the town showed up to witness the union of two people who had somehow found their way back to each other across impossible odds. The Reverend kept the ceremony simple, speaking about love and commitment and the mysterious ways that fate worked in people's lives. When Quinn slipped a second ring onto Faith's finger, a wedding band to accompany the engagement ring, his voice was steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. With this ring, I thee wed, for better or worse in sickness and health, till death do us part. Faith's voice was equally steady as she repeated the vows, sliding a simple gold band onto Quinn's finger. I take you to be my husband, to have and to hold from this day forward. When the Reverend pronounced them man and wife, the church erupted in applause. Quinn kissed his bride to cheers and whistles, and for the first time in 7 years, he felt completely whole. The reception was held in the town square, a potluck affair where everyone brought dishes to share. There was music and dancing, and Quinn discovered that Faith had learned some new steps during her time in Oregon. They danced until his feet ached, neither of them wanting the day to end. As the sun set and the party began to wind down, Quinn and Faith slipped away to the small house Quinn had been renting behind the store. It was not much, just 3 rooms and a kitchen, but Quinn had spent the last few weeks fixing it up, repairing the roof and whitewashing the walls. Faith had made curtains for the windows and brought wildflowers to put in jars around the rooms. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, a joining of 2 people who had waited far too long to be together. Afterwards, lying in bed with Faith curled against his side, Quinn felt a peace settle over him that he had not experienced since before the stagecoach attack. "Are you happy?" Faith asked softly, her fingers tracing idle patterns on his chest. "Happier than I ever thought I would be again," Quinn said honestly. He touched the locket, which he still wore even though he now had the real woman beside him. "I should probably put this away now." "No," Faith said quickly. "Keep wearing it if you want. It is part of our story, part of what brought us back together." Quinn kissed the top of her head. "Our story is not over yet. This is just the beginning of the next chapter." As weeks turned into months, Quinn and Faith settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. There were adjustments, of course. 7 years apart meant they had developed different habits, different ways of doing things. Faith liked the windows open at night to let in fresh air. Quinn preferred them closed. Faith was meticulous about organization. Quinn tended toward creative chaos. But they worked through each small conflict with patience and humor, both of them acutely aware of how precious their time together was. The store prospered with Faith's help. She had a head for numbers that Quinn lacked, and she reorganized the inventory system in a way that made everything more efficient. She also started selling her own creations, dresses and shirts that she sewed in the evenings, and those became popular enough that she could hardly keep up with demand. "We should hire someone to help in the store," Faith suggested one evening in late summer as they sat on their small porch, watching fireflies dance in the gathering darkness. "If I am going to keep up with the sewing orders, I cannot also be minding the counter all day." Quinn nodded thoughtfully. "There is a young fellow, Thomas Martin, who has been looking for work. Lost his father last winter and needs to support his mother and sisters. I was thinking about taking him on." "That sounds perfect," Faith said. "We can train him up and it will free both of us to focus on what we do best." Thomas proved to be a quick learner and a hard worker. With him handling most of the day-to-day store operations, Quinn was able to focus on expanding their inventory and building relationships with suppliers. Faith transformed the back room of the store into a sewing workspace, and her reputation as a seamstress spread beyond Nebraska City to neighboring towns. By autumn, they were doing well enough that Quinn started seriously looking at land for sale. He found a parcel on the eastern edge of town, 5 acres with a small creek running through it and a stand of oak trees that would provide shade in summer. "What do you think?" he asked Faith as they stood looking at the property on a crisp October afternoon. Faith turned in a slow circle, her eyes taking in the gently rolling land, the trees just beginning to turn color. "I think it is perfect. I can see a house right there with a porch that wraps around the front, maybe a garden over by the creek where the soil looks rich. Chickens," Quinn suggested. "Definitely chickens, and maybe a cow for milk." They bought the land that week and began making plans for a house. Quinn hired a carpenter from town, a skilled craftsman named Werner Schmidt who had emigrated from Germany 5 years prior. Together, they designed a 2-story house with 4 bedrooms, a large kitchen, a parlor, and a dining room. It was ambitious, larger than they needed for just the two of them, but both Quinn and Faith were thinking about the future, about the family they hoped to build. Construction began in late October, and Quinn spent every spare moment at the building site, helping with whatever tasks Werner would let him take on. Faith came by regularly with lunch, and they would sit on the foundation eating sandwiches and talking about which room would be which, what colors they should paint the walls, whether they should plant apple trees or cherry trees in the space they had designated for an orchard. Winter came hard that year, with snow arriving in early November and not letting up for weeks. Construction had to stop until spring, leaving them with a partially finished house standing like a skeleton on their land. Quinn fretted about the delay, but Faith was philosophical. "We waited 7 years to be together," she reminded him one evening as they sat by the fire in their little rental house. "We can wait a few more months for a house." Quinn pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. "You are right, of course. I just want to give you everything you deserve." "You already have," Faith said softly. "You gave me back my life, my future. Everything else is just details." They celebrated their first Christmas together with quiet joy. Quinn gave Faith a music box he had ordered from a catalog, inlaid with mother of pearl and playing a waltz that she said reminded her of the first time they had danced together. Faith gave Quinn a new leather journal, the cover embossed with his initials, for keeping track of his thoughts and plans. "I know you are not much for writing," she said as he opened it, "but I thought maybe you would want to record some of our story for our children someday. so they know how hard we fought to be together." Quinn was touched beyond words. That night, he made the first entry in the journal, writing about the day Faith walked into his store and changed his life all over again. Spring arrived in a rush of melting snow and budding trees. Construction on the house resumed, and by late May they were moving in, carrying their modest possessions from the rental to the new house that smelled of fresh paint and sawdust. Faith hung her curtains in the windows while Quinn assembled the bed Werner had built for them, a massive oak frame that would last generations. They christened every room of the house that first week, giddy with the newness of it all, with the sense that they were finally, truly building a life together. Quinn planted the apple trees he had been holding at the nursery all winter. Faith started her garden, putting in seeds for tomatoes and beans and squash. On a warm evening in early June, as they sat on their new porch watching the sun set over their land, Faith took Quinn's hand and placed it on her stomach. "I have something to tell you," she said, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Quinn's heart skipped. "Are you?" "I am. The doctor confirmed it yesterday. We are going to have a baby." Joy flooded through Quinn so powerfully that he could not speak for a moment. He pulled Faith into his arms, holding her tightly, feeling tears sting his eyes. "When?" he finally managed. "Early January, he thinks. A new year, a new life." Quinn kissed her deeply, tasting salt from tears he did not know if were his or hers. "I love you," he said when they parted. "I love you so much." "I love you too," Faith replied. "We are going to be a family, Quinn, a real family." The pregnancy was not easy. Faith suffered from terrible sickness in the early months, barely able to keep food down. Quinn hovered anxiously, bringing her dry toast and ginger tea, holding her hair back when she was ill, worrying constantly. But Faith bore it all with grace, insisting she was fine, that this was normal, that it would pass. And it did pass. By late summer, the sickness faded and Faith bloomed. She seemed to glow with health and happiness, her belly growing round beneath her loosened dresses. Quinn found himself constantly in awe of her, of the miracle of new life growing inside her. He became protective to the point of being overbearing, not wanting Faith to lift anything heavy or work too hard. She tolerated his fussing with good humor, though she drew the line when he suggested she stop sewing entirely. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she told him firmly. "I can still work, and I want to. It keeps my mind occupied and brings in good money." Quinn reluctantly backed down, though he still watched her like a hawk for any signs of distress. As autumn arrived again, painting the trees in brilliant reds and golds, they began preparing the nursery. They had chosen the smallest bedroom, the one with windows facing east to catch the morning sun. Quinn built a cradle from oak, sanding it until it was smooth as silk, while Faith sewed tiny gowns and blankets, her stitches small and perfect. They did not know if the baby would be a boy or girl, so they prepared for either possibility, choosing colors and decorations that would work for any child. Faith insisted on painting the walls a soft butter yellow that made the room feel warm and welcoming. "What should we name the baby?" Quinn asked one evening as they sat in the nursery, Faith in the rocking chair he had bought and Quinn on the floor putting the final touches on the cradle. "I have been thinking about that," Faith said. "If it is a boy, I thought maybe we could name him after your father." Quinn paused in his work. "My father and I did not part on good terms. I'm not sure I want that reminder." "But you loved him once, did you not? Before everything fell apart." Quinn considered this. "I did. He was a good man in many ways. It was grief that made him hard after we thought you died. He could not stand seeing me destroy myself with searching." "Then maybe the name is a way to heal that wound," Faith suggested gently. "A way to honor the good parts of your relationship." Maybe you are right. His name was Marcus. I could live with that. Quinn looked up at her. What about if it is a girl? Faith smiled. I was thinking Rose. It was my grandmother's name, and she was the kindest woman I ever knew. Rose Dalton, Quinn said, testing the sound. I like it. The first snow fell in mid-November, earlier than expected, dusting the world in white. Faith's time was growing closer, and Quinn found himself jumping at every small sound, worried that labor might start when he was not there to help. The doctor had assured him that first babies usually took their time, but Quinn could not shake his anxiety. Christmas came and went in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Faith moved slowly now, her belly huge, and Quinn insisted she rest as much as possible. She humored him, spending her afternoons in the parlor with her feet up, sewing small items while Quinn read to her from the newspaper or books they had ordered. The baby decided to arrive on a bitterly cold night in the second week of January, 1876. Quinn had just banked the fires and was preparing for bed when Faith gripped his arm, her face going pale. It is time, she said quietly. Quinn's carefully prepared plan flew out of his head. He ran to fetch the doctor, slipping twice on the icy path into town, his heart hammering with fear and excitement. Dr. Henderson arrived quickly, his bag already packed, and together they rushed back to the house where Faith was timing her contractions with admirable calm. First babies take time, Dr. Henderson reminded Quinn as he sat up in the bedroom. Why don't you boil some water and get me clean towels? Quinn was grateful for tasks to keep his hands busy. He boiled water, gathered towels, paced the kitchen floor wearing a path in the boards. From upstairs came occasional sounds that made his heart clench, Faith crying out in pain, the doctor's soothing voice. Hours passed. Dawn broke gray and cold. Quinn had given up any pretense of staying calm and was simply praying, bargaining with God to let both Faith and the baby come through this safely. He could not lose her again, not now, not when they had fought so hard to be together. Finally, as mid-morning sun broke through the clouds, he heard a sound that made his breath catch. A baby crying, thin and reedy but strong. Quinn took the stairs 3 at a time, bursting into the bedroom to find Dr. Henderson cleaning a tiny red-faced infant while Faith lay propped on pillows looking exhausted but radiant. You have a son, the doctor said with a smile. A big, healthy boy. Quinn moved to Faith's side on shaking legs, and she reached for his hand. We have a son, she repeated, her voice full of wonder. Dr. Henderson finished his work and placed the baby, now wrapped in a soft blanket, into Faith's arms. Quinn got his first good look at his child and felt his heart expand in his chest. The baby had a shock of dark hair and a furious little face, clearly unhappy about being born into a cold world. Hello, Marcus, Faith whispered, and the baby's eyes opened, dark and unfocused, looking in the direction of his mother's voice. Quinn reached out carefully, touching one tiny hand. Immediately, Marcus's fingers wrapped around his father's thumb, gripping with surprising strength. He is perfect, Quinn said, his voice thick with emotion. Dr. Henderson gave them a few minutes alone before insisting on checking Faith over once more. You did well, Mrs. Dalton. Get some rest now, and let that boy of yours sleep when he will. You will need your strength. After the doctor left, Quinn helped Faith get comfortable, then sat beside the bed holding his son while she slept. He studied every detail of Marcus's face, committing it to memory, still hardly able to believe this was real. A year and a half ago he had been alone, carrying a locket and living with ghosts. Now he had a wife and a son, a house and land, a future so bright it almost hurt to look at. Marcus stirred in his arms, making small snuffling sounds. Quinn carefully handed him back to Faith as she woke and watched in awe as she fed their son for the first time, the most natural thing in the world. "We made him," Faith said softly, looking up at Quinn with tears in her eyes. "Out of all the pain and loss, we made this perfect little person." Quinn leaned down to kiss her forehead. "You are amazing. I am in awe of you." The first weeks with Marcus were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. The baby was healthy but had strong lungs, and he was not shy about using them. Quinn and Faith took turns walking the floor at night, soothing him back to sleep, learning the difference between his hungry cry and his tired cry, and his "I just want to be held" cry. Quinn hired additional help at the store so he could spend more time at home. He would come in from town in the afternoons to find Faith nursing the baby or napping with Marcus curled on her chest, and his heart would swell with love so intense it was almost painful. "I never knew I could be this happy," he confessed to Faith one night as they both sat watching Marcus sleep in his cradle. "Even when we were young and planning our future, I did not imagine it could be this good." Faith laced her fingers through his. "We earned this happiness. We paid for it with 7 years of grief. I think that makes it sweeter." As Marcus grew from a tiny infant into a chubby, curious baby, Quinn and Faith settled into the rhythms of parenthood. The store continued to do well, and Faith's sewing business remained popular despite her reduced output. They were not rich, but they were comfortable, and that was enough. Marcus took his first steps on a warm day in September, letting go of the sofa and wobbling 3 steps into his father's waiting arms. Quinn whooped with joy, scooping up his son and spinning him around while Marcus giggled. Faith captured the moment in her memory, storing it alongside all the other precious moments they were collecting. By the time Marcus turned 2, Faith was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and Faith sailed through it with energy to spare. She chased after Marcus while her belly grew, sewed tiny clothes for the new baby, and helped Quinn plan an expansion of the store. Their daughter arrived in the spring of 1878, on a warm April morning when the apple trees were in full bloom. The birth was quicker than Marcus's had been, and by the time Dr. Henderson arrived, Faith had already done most of the work. "You have a daughter," the doctor announced, placing the squalling infant in Faith's arms. "Small but fierce, I would say." Quinn held his daughter, and she immediately stopped crying, her eyes opening wide to stare at him with an intensity that was almost unnerving. "Rose," he said softly. "Welcome to the world, Rose Dalton." Marcus, at 2 years old, was fascinated by his new sister. He wanted to hold her, touch her, bring her his toys. Quinn and Faith had to watch him carefully to make sure he was gentle, but it was clear he adored her. "We have a family," Faith said to Quinn one evening as they stood in the nursery doorway watching both children sleep. Marcus in his new bigger bed, Rose in the cradle that had been his. A real, complete family. Quinn wrapped his arms around his wife from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "I used to think my life ended when I thought you died. I was just going through motions, waiting to die myself. But this, having you back, our children, our home, this is better than anything I could have dreamed." Faith turned in his arms to face him. "You saved me too, you know. Even when I could not remember you, I felt like something was missing. Finding you again made me whole." They kissed softly, the kind of kiss that spoke of deep, abiding love, the kind built on shared sorrow and hard-won joy. The years that followed were full and rich. Marcus grew into a thoughtful boy who loved books and could calculate figures in his head almost as fast as his mother. Rose was wild and fearless, climbing trees and bringing home frogs and giving her parents constant heart attacks with her adventures. Quinn expanded the store again when Marcus was 5, adding a whole new section for farming equipment and feed. Faith opened a small dress shop in town, hiring 2 local women to help with the sewing. The business thrived, and soon women were coming from towns 30 miles away to buy Faith Dalton's dresses. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Quinn took Faith back to the spot by the river where he had proposed. The children stayed with Mrs. Patterson for the evening, giving them a rare night alone. 10 years, Faith said, looking out over the water. It still does not feel like enough to make up for the 7 we lost. We have many more years ahead of us, Quinn assured her. We will fill them so full of love and life that those 7 years will seem like nothing in comparison. Faith leaned against him, and they stood in comfortable silence watching the sun set. The locket still hung around Quinn's neck, though he rarely thought about it anymore. It had become just part of him, a reminder of where they had been and how far they had come. When Marcus turned 8 and Rose 6, Faith became pregnant again, a surprise to them both. "I thought we were done," she said with a laugh when Dr. Henderson confirmed it. 2 seemed like a good number. 3 is better, Quinn said, already imagining another child running around their house. This pregnancy was harder than the previous 2. Faith was older now, 35, and she felt every ache and pain more acutely. There were moments when Quinn worried, remembering the stagecoach attack, remembering all the ways he had nearly lost her before. But Faith was strong and stubborn, and she was determined to bring this baby safely into the world. Their second son was born in the winter of 1883, on a snowy February night. Labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Quinn genuinely feared for Faith's life. But she fought through, and when Dr. Henderson finally placed their son in her arms, she looked exhausted but triumphant. "What should we name him?" Quinn asked, brushing sweat-dampened hair from her forehead. Faith looked down at the baby, then up at Quinn. "What about Grant, for General Grant? He just died last year and he fought for the Union, kept the country together. I like the symbolism." "Grant Dalton," Quinn tested. "I like it." Marcus and Rose were fascinated by their new baby brother. Marcus, now 8 and serious-minded, appointed himself the baby's protector. Rose, 6 and energetic, wanted to play with Grant constantly, not quite understanding that babies could not keep up with her adventures. The house that had once seemed so large now felt perfectly sized, filled with the noise and chaos of 3 children. Quinn would come home from the store to find Marcus reading in the parlor, while Rose played with dolls and Faith nursed Grant in the rocking chair. And he would stand in the doorway just taking it all in, hardly believing this was his life. As the children grew, Quinn and Faith made sure they knew their story. Not all the details, not the pain and darkness, but the core of it. How their parents had loved each other, lost each other, and found each other again. How love could survive impossible odds if it was true and strong enough. "So you thought Mama was dead?" Marcus asked one evening when he was 10, listening to the story again. "I did," Quinn confirmed, "and she thought I was dead, but we both held on to hope even when it seemed foolish." "That is romantic," Rose declared from where she was sprawling on the floor playing with Grant. At 8, she was already reading novels and dreaming of grand adventures. "It was painful," Faith corrected gently. "But yes, also romantic. The point is, we never stopped loving each other, even when we thought we would never see each other again. That kind of love is rare and precious." Quinn reached over to take Faith's hand, lacing their fingers together in a gesture that had become automatic over the years. She smiled at him, the same smile that had captured his heart when he was 21 years old, and he marveled again at the sheer luck that had brought her back to him. The years continued to pass in a blur of school plays and business expansions, of birthdays and Christmases, of ordinary joys and small struggles. Marcus grew tall and serious, following his father into the business side of things. Rose remained wild and creative, spending hours drawing and painting when she was not climbing trees or exploring the creek. Grant was a happy, easy child, content to tag along with his older siblings or help his mother in her garden. When Marcus turned 18 in 1893, Quinn sat him down for a serious talk. "Your mother and I want you to go to university," he said. "Study business or law or whatever interests you. You are smart, and you should have opportunities we never had." Marcus looked conflicted. "But the store, you need help with the expansion. The store will be fine. Thomas is more than capable of managing things, and I am not so old that I cannot handle the work. This is important, son. Education opens doors." Faith added her voice. "We lost years, your father and I. We know how precious time is, and we do not want you to waste yours. Go learn, experience the world, then come back and apply what you have learned to making our town better." Marcus eventually agreed, and that fall he left for the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. The house felt empty without him, but Quinn and Faith were proud. They had given their son opportunities they never had, and that felt like a victory. Rose followed her brother to university 3 years later, studying art and literature, coming home for holidays with her head full of ideas and plans. Grant was still young, only 13 when Rose left, but he was already showing an interest in agriculture and talked about studying farming methods when his time came. "We are getting old," Faith said to Quinn one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset as they had done countless times over the years. She was 48 now, with silver threading through her dark hair. Quinn was 50, his face lined from years of sun and work. "We have earned every year," Quinn said, pulling her close, "and I would not trade a single one, not even the hard ones." Faith rested her head on his shoulder. "Do you still carry the locket?" Quinn touched his chest, feeling the familiar weight. "Always. It is part of me now." "I am glad. It is a reminder of what we survived, what we overcame." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky darkened and stars began to appear. Inside the house, Grant was doing homework at the kitchen table. From town, they could hear the distant sound of a train whistle, the world changing and growing around them. When Marcus came home from university with a degree in business and a plan to expand the family's enterprises into rail freight, Quinn could not have been prouder. When Rose came home with a teaching certificate and started a school for girls in Nebraska City, Faith cried with joy. When Grant took over the farm and implemented modern techniques that doubled their crop yields, Quinn knew their legacy was secure. The 20th century arrived with celebration and hope. Quinn and Faith, now in their 50s, watched the fireworks over Nebraska City on New Year's Eve 1900, surrounded by their children and the first of their grandchildren, Marcus's infant daughter cradled in Faith's arms. 26 years since you walked into my store," Quinn said to Faith as the sky exploded in color. "Best day of my life." "Second best," Faith corrected. "The best was when we got married," Quinn laughed. "Fair point." They continued to work into their 60s, though at a slower pace. Quinn finally handed over complete control of the store to Marcus and Thomas, who had been his partner for years. Faith trained young seamstresses in her techniques, ensuring her skills would not be lost. They spent more time with their grandchildren, now numbering 5, telling stories and spoiling them as grandparents were meant to do. On a warm spring evening in 1908, Quinn and Faith sat on their porch as the sun set, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. They were both 60 now, their hair silver, their faces lined with age and laughter. "I have been thinking," Faith said quietly, "about that day the stagecoach was attacked, about the randomness of it, how close I came to actually dying. Quinn squeezed her hand. Why dwell on that now? Because I want you to know that even if we had never found each other again, I would not have regretted loving you. Those 8 months we had when we were young were the best of my life, even before everything that came after. You made me believe in love, in goodness, in the possibility of happiness. Even when I could not remember you, that foundation you built in me remained. Quinn felt tears prick his eyes. You gave me the same gift, and then you gave it to me again when you walked through that door. I was a dead man walking before that day, just going through motions. You brought me back to life. They sat in the gathering darkness, hands clasped, watching fireflies begin their nightly dance. Inside the house, they could hear their grandchildren's laughter, the sounds of the family they had built together. The locket still hung around Quinn's neck, warm against his skin, a permanent reminder of the 7 years they had lost and the decades they had gained. No regrets? Faith asked. Not a single one, Quinn replied. How could I regret anything that led me to this moment, to this life with you? Faith smiled, the same smile that had captured his heart 40 years ago. I love you, Quinn Dalton. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. I love you too, Faith. Always have, always will. As the last light faded from the sky and the children were called inside, Quinn and Faith remained on the porch a little longer, neither willing to break the spell of the perfect moment. They had survived loss and grief, had found each other against impossible odds, had built a life rich with love and family and purpose. The locket beat against Quinn's heart with every breath, a reminder and a promise. They had been given a second chance, and they had made the most of it. That was all anyone could ask for, and more than most people ever got. They were blessed, and they knew it, and they were grateful for every single day they had together. As they finally rose to go inside, Quinn pulled Faith close for one more kiss, tender and full of the deep abiding love that had sustained them through everything. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, but tonight they had each other, and that was enough. It would always be enough. The years continued to pass gently. Quinn and Faith slowed down but never stopped moving forward. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 1924, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even 2 great-grandchildren. The party was held in their backyard, under the apple trees Quinn had planted nearly 50 years before, now gnarled and thick-trunked but still bearing fruit. Marcus gave a speech about his parents' love story, about how they had inspired him to believe in the power of commitment and faith. Rose read a poem she had written about lost love found again. Grant simply stood and raised his glass, too emotional to speak, while his own children clustered around his legs. Quinn looked at Faith across the gathering, saw her surrounded by the family they had created, and felt his heart overflow. She caught his eye and smiled, and in that smile he saw the girl of 19 he had fallen in love with, the woman of 26 who had walked into his store, and every age she had been in between. She was his past, his present, and his future, all wrapped up in one extraordinary person. That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, Quinn and Faith lay in bed together as they had done for 50 years. Quinn's hand found the locket out of habit, and Faith's hand covered his. "I am tired," Faith admitted. "More tired than I have ever been." Quinn heard the weight in her words. "I know, I am too." "You think we will find each other in the next life?" Faith asked. "If there is one, if there is any justice in the universe, yes," Quinn said firmly. "I cannot imagine heaven without you in it." Faith snuggled closer. "Then I am not afraid of anything, as long as I know you will be there waiting for me." "Always," Quinn promised. "I will wait as long as it takes. 7 years or 700, I will wait. They fell asleep in each other's arms as they had done thousands of times before. Faith passed peacefully in her sleep 3 months later, on a quiet autumn morning with golden leaves falling outside the window. Quinn woke to find her gone, her hand still in his, a slight smile on her face. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, but underneath it was a strange sense of peace. They had been given 50 years together, 50 years that neither of them had thought possible. That was more than most people got, more than they had any right to expect after the universe had tried so hard to keep them apart. Quinn lived another 2 years, cared for by his children and grandchildren, never taking off the locket that had guided him through the darkest period of his life. He spent his days telling stories about Faith, keeping her memory alive, making sure the younger grandchildren knew the woman their great-grandmother had been. On a spring morning in 1927, Quinn passed away sitting in his favorite chair on the porch, looking out over the land he and Faith had built their life on. The locket was still around his neck, and in his hand was the journal Faith had given him that first Christmas, filled with decades of entries about their life together. His children buried him next to Faith in the cemetery on the hill overlooking Nebraska City. The headstones were simple but elegant, carved from the same piece of granite so they would never be separated. The locket was buried with Quinn as he had requested because it belonged with him always. The store that Quinn had built continued under Marcus's management, eventually becoming a regional chain. Rose's school grew into a respected institution that educated generations of young women. Grant's farm became a model of modern agricultural practices. The house on the 5 acres was preserved and passed down through the family, always lived in, always loved, always full of the echoes of the life Quinn and Faith had built together. Their great-grandchildren told the story to their great-grandchildren, about the cowboy who carried a locket for 7 years, and the woman who walked into his store alive against all odds. It became family legend, a reminder that true love could survive anything if it was strong enough and pure enough. The locket itself was eventually discovered when a great-great-grandson was doing research into family history and had Quinn's grave examined as part of a historical preservation project. It was carefully removed, restored, and placed in a museum in Nebraska City, along with Faith's wedding dress and the journal Quinn had kept. The exhibit was titled 7 Years of Faith, and it drew visitors from all over the country who came to read about a love that refused to die. Inside the locket, preserved for over a century, was the photograph of a young woman with dark hair and bright eyes, captured forever at 19, smiling at something beyond the camera's frame. Next to it, added at some point, was a small lock of silver hair, tied with a piece of faded ribbon. The museum curator who cataloged the items noted in her report that she had never seen such a well-worn piece of jewelry. The silver was thin in spots from constant touching, the chain repaired multiple times, the hinge loose from being opened and closed thousands of times. It was, she wrote, clearly an object that had been loved and used and treasured, not just kept in a drawer. It was an object that had served its purpose well, keeping hope alive when hope was all there was, and that, in the end, was the real story. Not just about a cowboy and the woman he loved, but about hope and faith and the refusal to give up even when everything seemed lost. It was about 2 people who loved each other enough to hold on through 7 years of separation, and who then loved each other well enough to build a beautiful life when they were finally reunited. Their descendants still lived in Nebraska City, still operated businesses and farms and schools bearing the family name. The house on the 5 acres still stood, occupied now by Quinn and Faith's great-great-great-grandson, and his family, the apple trees still bearing fruit, the creek still running through the back property. On quiet evenings, if you stood on the porch at sunset, you could almost feel the presence of the two people who had built this legacy. You could imagine them sitting in their rocking chairs, hands clasped, watching the sky turn gold and pink and purple, grateful for another day together. You could feel the love that had sustained them, that had brought them back from the dead, that had created something lasting and beautiful out of pain and loss. The locket had done its job. It had kept Quinn connected to Faith through 7 impossible years. It had been a talisman, a hope, a prayer made physical. And when Faith had walked into that store alive, the locket had transformed from a memorial into a celebration, from an ending into a beginning. Their story was one for the ages, proof that sometimes, against all odds, love really did conquer all. That faith was rewarded, that holding on mattered, that the universe sometimes, just sometimes, gave people the second chances they deserved. Quinn Dalton and Faith Whitmore had loved each other for 80 years total. 7 of those years spent apart and grieving, 50 of those years spent together building a life, and 23 more years living on in the hearts and memories of everyone they had touched. Their love story became legend, their commitment became inspiration, their life together became a beacon of hope for anyone who had ever loved and lost and wondered if it was worth it to keep believing. It was worth it. Their story proved that beyond any doubt. Love was worth fighting for, worth waiting for, worth holding on to even when it seemed impossible. The cowboy had carried a locket for 7 years, and when the woman walked into his store alive, he had been ready. He had kept faith, and faith had kept him, and together they had built something that lasted long beyond their years on earth. That was the true ending of their story, not death but legacy, not loss but love that echoed through generations. The locket still existed, the photograph still smiled, and people still came to learn about the couple who had refused to let fate keep them apart. They had won in the end. Love had won, and that was the best possible ending anyone could ask for.